It was the late 90s, and I was 17 years old. My name is Catherine, and I grew up in a big city. It was just me, my mom, and my younger brother, who is almost 10 years younger. Because of the age difference, I was more like a second parent to him. We had a 2-bedroom apartment on the 11th floor of a large building downtown. It was close to everything, so I liked it. My mom's work was just around the corner, and my school was close too. Since money was tight for our little family, I started working part-time as soon as I could. There were lots of places that were hiring, but most didn't want someone as young as me. On summer vacation, though, I went around to almost every business in the area to hand out a resume. One of the few places that called me back was a pizza place a few blocks away from my home. It was in a small strip mall with some other businesses, most of which I applied to. There was a pretty large parking lot at the front, large for the city anyway. There was one other food place there, but other than that, the other businesses would have been closed in the late evenings. Since my shifts were all evenings, it was pretty empty in that whole area. One night, I was working alone as I often did. There was another guy there until 8, then it was just me until we closed at 11. While I was there, the work phone rang. I answered it as usual, expecting a customer wanting to place an order. Instead, I was met with the sound of a deep man's voice. The person on the phone started asking me strange personal questions. I don't remember all of them, but one of the creepiest was,
"Does your boyfriend ever come in when you're working?"
I didn't even have a boyfriend, but still, it was creepy. At first I thought he was joking in a weird, awkward way, so I didn't hang up right away, but eventually it was too much, so I hung up. It wasn't long before the phone rang again. I hesitated but answered it, hoping it was a different person calling, but it was the same man. This time, he said that he was watching me. That was entirely possible, because there was a large window at the front of the store, and it was a public business. Anybody could look that up. Still, the fact that he would say it was truly chilling. I hung up again. The phone rang a third time, but this time I let it ring. I could get in trouble for not answering, but my boss would understand if I explained it, so I didn't care. The rest of my shift felt like it dragged on forever. Every time the phone rang, I flinched because I thought it would be him again. Even though I didn't want to, I did start answering it because I kinda had to eventually. To my relief, the man never called back, or if he did, then he did a good job of disguising his voice. By 10:30, I just wanted the night to end. I kept glancing at the entrance, counting down the seconds until I could go home. When my shift finally came to an end, I felt a relief, but I was also nervous to go out there alone. I knew I had to walk home, and the thought of that man being out there scared me. It was only 10 or 15 minutes for me to get home, and the area is usually pretty safe. Even still, my mom would always pay for a taxi when I worked late. More often than not, I would walk anyway and save the money. Once I was done cleaning up and closing the place, I grabbed my backpack and headed for the door. The parking lot was well lit with many lampposts, but there were few cars. I think I only saw 2. I walked quickly, keeping my eyes on the ground. Before I even made it out of the parking lot, I heard footsteps behind me. They were fast, and I turned to see who was coming. About 20 feet back, there was a middle-aged man running in my direction. I didn't see where he came from. He just seemed to appear out of nowhere. As soon as I saw him, I started running without thinking. The man was fast, keeping up with me effortlessly. My heart pounded as I pushed myself to run faster. I could hear his footsteps getting closer, and I knew I couldn't outrun him for long. There was a dark apartment building to my right, but I knew it would be a few minutes at least before anybody would come out to help me. In seconds, the man caught up to me. He grabbed my backpack, yanking me backward. I stumbled but managed to stay on my feet, but I swung around again and almost lost my balance. He was tossing me around like a rag doll with my backpack. Eventually, I squirmed out of the straps, leaving the backpack behind. Once I was free, I didn't look back. I just kept running with my mind focused on getting away. The strip mall was close to a busy street, and I knew there was a bus stop around the corner. I made a beeline for it, hoping there would be a bus or at least other people around. As I turned the corner, I saw a bus pulling up to the stop. I sprinted towards it, waving frantically at the driver. I shouted as I reached the bus. The driver opened the door, and I stumbled inside, gasping for breath. I turned to look back, but the man was gone. My backpack, with all my things, was lost, but I didn't care. I blurted out the story to the bus driver, but I doubt it made much sense. He looked confused, but asked if I wanted him to call the police. I shook my head no, because I just wanted to get home. The bus went close to my building. but it was only one stop away, hardly worth taking the bus, but I did anyway. When I got home, my mom was there, and she asked me what was wrong. Not wanting to worry her, I lied and said it was nothing. The next day, I made up some story about how I lost my backpack. It wasn't until almost 10 years later that I told her what really happened. My parents were away one weekend when I was in the 11th grade. It was the year 2010. I decided to have some of the guys stay over on Friday night, since we would have the house to ourselves. We went to a large high school, and my house was on a quiet street, not that far away. I was able to walk to school in about 10 minutes. Many other people from school lived nearby, so it was always easy to get to my friends' places. There were some guys that me and my friends didn't really get along with. It was nothing too serious, and there was never any actual fighting, but it was a bit of a rivalry. My best friend Drew would get into it sometimes with this guy named Jarrett. He had all his friends on his side too. It was just a typical high school thing that most people probably go through. After school on Friday, one of my friends came right home with me, then the others joined after dinner. We were just hanging out and talking with the TV on in the background. That went on for a few hours. It was around 9 when the phone rang. I picked it up, expecting one of my other friends who said he might come over. Instead, a deep, creepy voice came through the line. He said he was watching us. I figured it was one of our other friends messing around, so I laughed it off and hung up. We didn't think much of it and continued with our night. Then a few minutes later, the doorbell rang. I looked out the window and saw a large white van parked in front of the house. A man was standing on the front porch, looking around. He was tall and thin, with baggy clothes that hung off of him. He was about 25 years old if I had to guess. We all got a bit nervous, but we didn't want to call the cops because we had been drinking, and we didn't want to get in trouble. Instead, we tried to ignore him. We moved to the living room at the back of the house, where there was a smaller TV. I thought we would just stay there for a while until the guy at the door took off. Within a few minutes, though, we heard a tap on the window. The man was there, standing on my back deck. He would have had to go through a gate to get there, because our backyard was fenced in. It was not normal for strangers to just come in, especially late at night. I looked over to him, and he smiled at me, then waved. His face was lit up by our back porch lights, and the way the light hit his face was creepy. I tried to look away, but it was hard not to pay attention. Then I saw him point at the door, as if he wanted me to open it. Again, I was still trying to ignore him, but then I heard the door handle turn. Of course it was locked, but the fact that he would try to open it was scary. Drew then whispered that we needed to call the cops. I hesitated because of the beer bottles scattered around, but the situation was getting too serious to ignore. Drew took out his phone and dialed 911. Then I tried to clean the place up, just in case the cops came inside. I could hear the operator asking questions, and Drew was handling it. Meanwhile, the man outside hadn't gone anywhere. I could still see him out there, and every time he saw me, he smiled. I wondered how long before he'd break the glass and force his way in. After only a few minutes, we heard the police sirens coming. The man must have heard it too, because he stopped messing with the door and walked back towards the front of the house. We peeked through the front window and saw him get into the white van. He didn't drive away though, he just sat there waiting. When the police arrived, 2 officers went up to the van. We watched from the window as they talked to the guy who was then in the driver's seat. Then one of the officers came to the door and asked us what had happened. We told them everything, from the creepy phone call to the man trying to get in the back door. The police officer then asked if we had any security camera footage or any proof that the man had trespassed. We didn't, so I had to tell him that. Then the cop went back to the van where the man was still waiting. To our frustration, they let him go with a warning. The officer explained that the man denied coming up to the house and claimed he was just parked there to make a phone call. They admitted it was suspicious, but said they didn't have enough to hold him. We watched as the white van drove off slowly, disappearing down the street. 2 of my friends agreed to stay the night, which was great because I was still scared. For the next hour or so, we would look out the window occasionally and saw that van a few more times. He was definitely circling the block for a while. Throughout the rest of the night, the phone rang a few more times, but I didn't answer it. Like I said earlier, the man looked to be in his 20s, but I think it was probably connected to those other guys from school anyway. There was no reason other than that for anyone to mess with us. Whether they hired the guy or he was related to one of them, I'm not sure. I'm pretty sure it was them, though. When this happened, I was living in a small townhouse with my friends Brianna and Jocelyn. My name is Kara. We were friends from high school, and we moved in together when I moved back to my hometown after college. I was working downtown at the time, and we lived a short bus ride away from the city center. We liked making dinner together, having friends over, and going out. We were all about 25, and still enjoyed going out dancing, at least once each week. It was Kara's birthday, and we all went to a bar downtown. We were having a good time, chatting and laughing over drinks. At some point, a guy approached me. He seemed nice enough at first, and we talked for a while. He was actually really good at holding a conversation, which is pretty rare, especially when everyone is drinking. He was handsome, but must have been at least 10 years older than me. After about 15 minutes, I wanted to move on, but I couldn't find a smooth way out of the conversation. I tried to end it, but he was a little too persistent. He kept trying to get my number. I didn't want to cause a scene or make things awkward, so I ended up giving it to him, even though I didn't really want to. He texted me right there to give me his number, and he stayed, presumably to make sure that it was really my number. After that, he basically disappeared. We stayed at that bar for over another hour, but I didn't see him again at all. At the time, I figured he wanted to quit while he was ahead, and took off. We eventually took off to a different spot, then went home at around 2 in the morning. We all took a cab back together, and then went to bed pretty much right away. The next few days were strange. I started getting calls from different numbers. None of them were the guy from the bar. It was a lot of random numbers. I thought it was weird, but I figured it might just be telemarketers or something. That happens sometimes anyway, but this was way more. I ignored them for a while, but when I answered, there was usually nobody there. I told my roommates about it, but they couldn't explain it any more than I could. Brianna had a stalker before, so she was concerned right away. I didn't think it was that serious though, because the guy wasn't even pursuing me. He only sent me the one text. If someone is going to stalk you, then they usually say something when you answer the phone. It felt more like I was being pranked than anything else. It was annoying though, and I wanted it to stop. Blocking the number didn't seem to work, since a new one would always come up. One evening, my phone rang again, as it always did. A few times each day, I would answer it hoping I could figure out what was going on. I picked it up, expecting the usual silence. Instead, a voice said,
"I'll be there in 10 minutes. Be ready."
and then hung up. I said hello, but it was definitely gone. That creeped me out a bit, but I really thought it was BS, just like all of the other calls. Even still, I kept looking out my window just in case. After almost exactly 10 minutes, I noticed an old car slowly driving around on the street in front of our townhouse. It circled a few times before parking in front of my house. It was a large sedan with rust spots, and it seemed to be a light brown color. There was a street light right near where it stopped, and I could see a man sitting in the driver's seat. My curtains were closed, but I was peeking through. Seconds later, my phone rang, but I didn't answer. Then I looked back out to the car and saw the man inside was holding his phone. I thought it was him that called me. Then the man got out of the car. He wasn't the guy from the bar. This man was older, probably in his 50s, and built like a bodybuilder. I don't know if that was a relief, or if it was even creepier. He stood in front of my house, looking around as if he was checking the place out. Then, he looked at his watch and took out his phone again. It looked like he was calling someone, but this time my phone didn't ring. I didn't know who this guy was, or what he wanted, but I knew I didn't want to find out. I grabbed my phone and called the cops. I know I sounded crazy, trying to explain what happened, but to the emergency operator, it didn't seem to matter. They sent a police car over, even though my story probably didn't make any sense. They told me to stay inside, which I would have done anyway. I hung up and peeked through the curtains again. The man was still there, standing by my house, looking around as if he was waiting for something. I kept hoping he would just leave, but he stayed put. Finally, in the distance, I heard sirens. As they grew louder, the man seemed to notice them too. He looked around, clearly nervous, then glanced at his watch again. I watched him intently, hoping the police would arrive before he decided to do anything. When the sirens became unmistakably close, he quickly got back into his car. He didn't rush, just casually walked to the car and got in. He started the engine and drove off, just as the flashing lights of the police cars appeared at the end of my street. The police arrived, and I went outside to meet them. I explained that the car that just took off was the guy I called about. The cops radioed for another to check it out. I didn't hear back about what happened with him, but I am sure he had some excuse. I gave them the number that called me when I saw him, but it must have been some kind of spoof number because it led nowhere. That night, I was really glad to have roommates because it would have been scary to be alone. My friends were there for me and we got through it. I still think the guy from the bar had something to do with it, but I never saw him again and didn't try to contact him, although I did give his number to the cops. He must have been some kind of creeper who sent the other guy over to my house to do who knows what. My name is Sam, and I used to do some babysitting to make a bit of money back when I was too young for an actual job. I was in the 10th grade. There was this one family I sat for regularly. They had an 8-year-old girl named Emily. She was a sweet kid, always polite and easy to manage. Her parents were strict, so that meant that she was in bed early every night. One Friday night, I arrived at their house around 7 p.m. Emily's dad gave me the usual rundown before leaving for a work event. I was 16 at the time, so I didn't have a cell phone yet. I know a lot of people have them at 16, but my parents wouldn't allow it. The family that I was sitting for had an extra phone that they left at the house, which was for me to use while I was there, just for emergencies, or if they wanted to check in. The dad left it on the kitchen counter for me, just in case. After about an hour of playing board games and reading stories, I put Emily to bed at around 8:30. She went without a fuss, and I didn't hear another sound from her. Once Emily was settled in, I headed downstairs to watch some TV. The big house was quiet, and I felt relaxed, enjoying the break from schoolwork. I'd been watching TV for about an hour when I heard a phone ringing from another room. Thinking it was the one on the kitchen counter, I went to check it, but when I picked it up, it wasn't ringing. The sound was coming from somewhere else. I followed the sound to the next room down, which was an office or study. There, I found a cell phone sitting on a table. It wasn't one I recognized, but I picked it up anyway to check the caller ID. It showed private number. I hesitated, but decided to let it ring. After it stopped, I went back to the living room, thinking it was probably a wrong number. About 5 minutes later, the phone started ringing again. I went over again, and the same private number message appeared on the screen. This time, I felt a bit worried. What if it was important? Maybe it was the parents calling from a different phone. I decided to answer it. "Hello?" I said. There was a brief pause before a man's voice responded. "Hi, this is Emily's dad. My plans changed, and you can go home now. I'll be back soon." Something about his voice didn't sit right with me. I had just talked with him, and this didn't sound like him. Everyone sounds different on the phone, but still, I had a bad feeling. I decided to play it safe. "No problem. I can leave whenever you come back," I said. The man on the other end insisted. "You need to leave now. It's fine, really. Just go." I repeated that I wouldn't leave until he arrived. The call ended abruptly while I was mid-sentence. I sat there for a moment, feeling a bit shaken. Why would he insist on me leaving if he wasn't home yet? I decided to stay put and wait like we agreed before. It just felt like the right thing to do. I went back to the living room and tried to focus on the TV, but my mind kept drifting back to the phone call. Something wasn't adding up, and the more I thought about it, the more creeped out I felt. I checked on Emily to make sure she was still asleep. She was fine, then returned to the couch. Time seemed to crawl by. I kept glancing at the clock, hoping the parents would come back soon. At around 10:45 p.m., the phone in the study rang again. This time, I didn't hesitate. I went straight to the study and answered it on the first ring. The same man's voice was on the other end. "I told you to leave. Why are you still there?" I took a deep breath and responded firmly. "I told you, I can't leave Emily alone. I'll wait until you get here." The man paused for a moment before speaking again. "You don't understand. You need to leave now." I hung up the phone and decided to call the dad on his regular number. I went to the kitchen where the other phone was and found their number in the saved contacts. The phone rang several times before going to voicemail. I left a message explaining what had happened and asked them to call me back as soon as possible. Feeling even more unsettled, I went back to the living room and tried to stay calm. I just had to hold out a little longer until they got home. At 11 p.m., I heard the front door open. My heart raced as I got up and walked to the hallway. Emily's parents walked in, looking surprised to see me standing there. "Everything okay?" the dad asked, noticing my anxious expression. I quickly explained the phone calls and how the man on the other end insisted that I leave. The dad's face darkened with concern as I described what happened. "We didn't call you," he said firmly. "Our plans never changed, and we didn't ask you to leave." Then I walked to the study and picked up that other phone, then handed it to the dad. He looked down at it for a good 5 seconds, then looked back at me. "Where did you get this?" he asked. "It was just sitting there," I told him. He then told me that he had never seen that phone before. He asked me if I was sure about what I told him. When I said yes, he called the police right away. I got paid the few bucks that I was promised, and then my mom picked me up, and we went home. I was confused for a long time about that night, but now I think there was somebody trying to get to Emily. They must have planted the phone in the house knowing that I would be there, and might not recognize it anyway. That would have to mean that they knew enough about Emily to know that her parents were going to be out that night, and I would be there instead. I have to assume that the phone was some kind of burner, otherwise it would have been easy to catch the person. As far as I know, they never made any arrests in this case, but at the end of the day, the little girl was safe.